Tonight's story is so quietly devastating it lingers long after the last word is spoken, set deep in the unforgiving West, where silence carries more weight than gunfire. It unfolds in a land where blood is remembered, where water dries without warning, and where a single forbidden truth can tilt the balance of an entire people. It began with something small, just a strip of white cloth caught on stone, yet it was enough to wake ghosts no one dared to name. The sun rose slow and thin over the jagged ridges of the Sierra Madre, a pale blade of light that cut more than it warmed. Goyathlai stood alone on the high point of weathered sandstone, boots planted wide, arms loose at his sides. The wind, which usually moved like breath across the camp, had died completely. No rustle in the scrub oak. No call from the ravens that always circled at dawn. The silence pressed against his ears until it felt like water rising. He did not move. His eyes, dark and steady, tracked the small white scrap that had drifted in during the night. A torn piece of cloth, too clean, too fine for this place, had lodged itself against a low pile of stones near the east-facing rise where pollen was sometimes scattered at first light. The place was not marked, not fenced, but every man and woman in the band knew it carried weight. Usen watched from that direction. To let something foreign rest there was to invite imbalance. Goyathlai's breath came even, measured. He felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the same quiet coil he had known since the ravine 3 winters past. The cloth was hers. He had seen it before, caught on her sleeve when she carried water yesterday, the way it fluttered like something trying to escape. Now it lay where it should never have been. From the shadow of a piñón lower down the slope, Kaya watched. Her hands stayed folded over the small leather pouch at her belt, fingers tight around the drawstring. She did not speak. She did not need to. The way the birds had gone quiet said enough. The land remembered things men tried to forget. Goyathlai let his gaze linger on the white scrap another long moment. Then he turned his head, just enough to see the camp below. Low wickiups tucked against the rock, thin smoke rising straight up in the still air, the faint shapes of people moving slow through morning chores. Lila was there, near the central fire pit, kneeling to stack dry wood. Her back was straight, but he could see the careful way she kept her movements small, as if trying not to disturb the air itself. He felt the pull of 2 paths. One was to walk down now, pick up the cloth, carry it back to her without a word, and let the moment pass. The other was to leave it where it lay and pretend the wind had done nothing more than play a small trick. Either way carried cost. To touch it himself would be to acknowledge what the land already knew. To ignore it was to let the imbalance grow. The sun cleared the ridge fully. Light struck the white cloth and made it glare. Goyathlai exhaled once, slow and controlled. He stepped forward, boots scraping softly on stone, and crouched. His fingers closed around the scrap. Cool, faintly damp, with night dew. He held it a second longer than necessary, feeling the weave under his calluses, remembering the tremble in her hands 3 years ago, when she had pressed a strip just like this against the hole in his shoulder. He rose. The cloth disappeared into the fold of his shirt, against skin. No one below had seen, or if they had, they gave no sign. Kaya was closer now. She had moved without sound, the way old women sometimes do when the ground itself seems to carry them. She stopped a respectful distance away, pollen pouch still gripped in both hands. Date, she said. Her voice was low, almost lost in the returning wind that had begun to stir at last, hesitant, like something testing the air after long stillness. Goyathle did not answer. He looked past her, down to where Lila had paused in her work, head lifted, eyes scanning the high point, as though she felt the weight of being watched. For a heartbeat, their gazes met across the distance, hers uncertain, his unreadable. Then he turned away from Kaya and started down the slope, steps deliberate, the small white cloth burning against his chest like a second heart. The silence of the morning had broken, but something heavier had taken its place. The land had noticed. And once noticed, it did not forget. The sun had bled low across the ridges, turning the sky the color of old blood and bruised stone. In the central clearing of the camp, the fire pit had already caught, flames low and steady, feeding on dry juniper that snapped like small bones. Smoke rose straight, thick with the smell of resin and hot earth. The elders sat in their accustomed half-circle, on blankets worn thin by seasons, backs to the cooling rock wall, faces carved deeper by the flickering light. Lila moved through the edge of the gathering with the heavy clay olla balanced against her hip. Water sloshed inside, cold from the spring, heavy enough that her shoulder burned with each step. She kept her eyes on the ground, dust, small stones, the dark print of bare feet and moccasins, anything but the faces turned toward the fire. The olla was full. She had carried it twice the usual distance today because the nearer seep had gone muddy overnight. No one had explained why. No one needed to. She approached the circle from the side, knees bending slow to set the vessel down near the elders without spilling. The clay thudded softly against packed earth. A drop escaped the rim and darkened the dirt like a small wound. Goyathle sat among them, not at the center, but close enough that the firelight caught the sharp planes of his face. His hands rested loose on his thighs, palms up in the way of a man listening more than speaking. When Lila straightened, their eyes met, not by accident, not by design, but the way two things in motion cross paths and cannot uncross. She felt it in her chest first, a cold tightening, like a hand closing around her ribs. She dropped her gaze at once, too late. The moment stretched, thick as the smoke coiling upward. No one else seemed to notice. The elders continued their low murmur, words in the old tongue she still caught only in fragments. One of the older men, Haska, the one whose voice always carried the rasp of long-ago smoke, leaned forward to take the dipper from beside the olla. His fingers brushed the rim. He paused, then said something quiet, almost to himself. A name. Not hers. Not Goyathle's. A name that belonged to someone long gone, spoken once and then swallowed by the fire's crackle. The air changed. The elders stilled. Haska's hand froze mid-motion. He had broken the unspoken thing. To speak a dead man's name so close to the fire, so close to dusk, was to invite the shadow back. No one corrected him aloud. No one had to. The silence that followed was heavier than any rebuke. Lila felt Goyathle's gaze still on her, steady, unblinking. It was not anger in his eyes, not hunger. It was recognition, slow, reluctant, like a man seeing something he had buried and finding the grave disturbed. She wanted to step back, to melt into the lengthening shadows where she had learned to disappear. But Kaya's orders had been plain. Serve here, near the center, every evening until told otherwise. To leave now would be to disobey. To stay was to stand under that gaze longer, to let it peel away another layer of the safety she had scraped together since the wagon. She straightened her back by inches, lifted the empty dipper from the olla, and turned toward the nearest elder. Her hands did not shake. Not visibly. She poured water into the gourd he held out. Careful. Slow. The liquid caught the firelight and gleamed dark red for a heartbeat. Goyathle did not move. But when she finished and stepped back, preparing to retreat to the woodpile, he rose. Not sudden. Not loud. Just the quiet unfolding of a man who had decided something without needing to speak it. He took one step forward, then another. The elders watched without turning their heads. Lila froze, Ola still braced against her side, water shifting inside like a held breath. Goyathle lifted his right hand, slow, open, and pointed once, not at her face, but at the ground near her feet. A small gesture. Precise. No words. The meaning was clear enough in the firelight. Stay. The camp held its breath. Even the fire seemed to listen. Lila felt the last thin margin of invisibility slip away. From this moment, she was seen, not as captive, not as servant, but as something that carried weight, something the land itself had begun to weigh. She could not run without breaking Kaya's word. She could not stay without inviting whatever came next. Goyathle lowered his hand. He did not look away. The elders resumed their murmur, quieter now, as though the name had never been spoken. But the silence around Lila had thickened. It pressed against her skin like the first cold wind of night. She stood there, Ola heavy in her arms, the fire warming one side of her face, while the dark cooled the other. And somewhere behind her, in the lengthening shadow of the rocks, she felt Kaya watching. Still, silent, remembering. The first light came thin and gray along the creek, turning the water the color of old iron. Mist clung low to the willows, heavy with the smell of wet earth and rotting cottonwood leaves. Lila knelt on the flat stone at the bank, sleeves rolled to her elbows, scrubbing a length of rough wool against the smooth rock. The cold bit into her knuckles, turning them red, then white. Each stroke sent small ripples outward, breaking the stillness she had come to rely on. She worked alone. The camp was still waking behind her. Thin smoke from distant fires, the low murmur of horses shifting in the brush. But here the only sound was water moving over stone and the wet slap of cloth. She had chosen this hour on purpose. Dawn was quiet. Dawn let her breathe without eyes on her back. The wool darkened under her hands, the dirt loosening in thin brown threads that swirled downstream. She paused once to wring it out, water dripping cold between her fingers. And that was when she saw it. A small leather pouch half buried in the damp gravel at the water's edge. It had fallen from someone's belt, perhaps carried downstream by last night's rain. The drawstring was loose, a faint dusting of yellow pollen clinging to the seam. Hoddenton. Sacred, the kind scattered at sunrise to speak to Usen. Lila's breath caught. She knew what it was. She had seen Kaya touch one like it the day before. Fingers careful, almost reverent. To pick it up was to touch something not meant for her hands. To leave it was to let it lie in the water, muddied, forgotten. She hesitated. The creek kept moving, indifferent. Her fingers hovered, then closed around the pouch. The leather was soft, warm from the sun that had not yet risen fully. A few grains of pollen spilled onto her palm, fine as dust, bright against her skin. She stared at them a long moment, feeling the weight of what she had done. The land did not forgive carelessness. Not here. Footsteps came soft behind her. Lila turned without rising. Kaya stood a few paces back, arms folded, face unreadable in the gray light. The older woman's eyes went first to the pouch in Lila's hand, then to her face. No anger showed. Only a slow, deliberate stillness, like a stone settling deeper into the earth. Kaya stepped closer. She did not reach for the pouch. Instead, she crouched, knees cracking faintly, and held out her open palm. Lila placed the leather in it without a word. Kaya closed her fingers around it, slow, then tucked it back into the fold of her belt. The pollen on Lila's hand she ignored, as though it had never been there. "You carry more today," Kaya said. Her voice was low, flat. Near the center, closer to the chief's lodge, water, wood, whatever is needed. Lila felt the words settle like cold stones in her stomach. Closer meant more eyes. Closer meant less shadow to hide in. She had wanted only to disappear into the rhythm of work, to become part of the camp the way a worn path becomes part of the ground. But this pulled her nearer the heart of things. The fire, the elders, him. She nodded once. Yes. Kaya studied her another heartbeat. Then she rose, slow, joints protesting the cold. She turned away without another word, footsteps fading into the mist. But the distance she left behind was wider than before. Not anger, not punishment, just the quiet withdrawal of trust, small and final as a door closing on its own. Lila stayed kneeling a long time after Kaya was gone. The pollen still dusted her palm. She rubbed it against the wool she had been washing, trying to erase it, but the yellow clung, stubborn. She felt the creek's current pull at the hem of her dress, steady, patient. The land had noticed her touch. Now it would remember. When she finally stood, wringing the last of the water from the cloth, she looked up the slope toward the camp. Goyathle was there. Only a silhouette against the rising light, standing motionless near the edge of the rocks. He had not come closer. He did not need to. The distance between them felt shorter than it should. He watched her, not moving, not speaking, just watching. Lila turned back to the creek, folding the wet wool over her arm. The mist was lifting now, the sun breaking through in thin spears. She started up the path toward the center of camp, steps heavier than before, the small weight of the pollen still on her skin, like a mark she could not wash away. Behind her, the water kept running. It carried nothing visible, but it carried memory all the same. And memory, once carried, did not easily let go. The night settled heavy over the camp, the kind of dark that pressed down like wet wool. The central fire had burned low, fed only enough to keep the coals alive, casting long shadows that licked at the rock walls and the edges of the elders' blankets. Smoke hung thick in the still air, juniper and pine resin, sharp enough to sting the eyes. The smell mixed with the faint metallic tang of sweat from a long day's work and the dry dust that never quite left the ground. Lila carried the water olla again, this time smaller, lighter, but no less burdensome. Her arms ached from the day's hauling. Her palms were raw where the rough clay had chafed. Kaya had come for her at dusk with a single word: serve. No explanation. No room for refusal. Lila had followed without protest, steps measured, eyes fixed on the path ahead. The elders sat in their loose circle, faces half lit, half hidden. Goyathle was among them, knees drawn up, elbows resting on them, hands clasped loose. He did not speak much tonight. He listened. The firelight caught the faint scar along his collarbone, a pale line that disappeared under the loose fold of his shirt. Lila approached from the side, keeping her movements small. She knelt near the Allah's usual place, close enough now that she could feel the heat of the coals on her face, close enough that Goyathle's shadow fell across her hands. She set the vessel down carefully. The water inside shifted once, then stilled. She stayed low, filling the first gourd for Haska. The old man took it without looking at her, his fingers brushing hers for the barest instant. Dry, calloused, steady. She moved to the next elder, then the next. Each pour was slow, deliberate, the only sound the soft glug of water and the crackle of burning wood. Goyathle watched her. Not openly. Not with intent. Just the quiet tracking of a man who had learned long ago to see without seeming to look. When she reached him, she hesitated. Only a fraction of a second, before dipping the gourd. She lifted it toward him, eyes down, breath held shallow. His hand closed around the gourd. His fingers did not touch hers. But the moment the clay met his palm, his grip tightened, knuckles whitening for an instant before he relaxed again. He drank slowly, eyes never leaving the fire. When he lowered the gourd, he set it beside him instead of passing it back. The talk had been low, circling the signs. Birds gone quiet at dawn, wind dying without cause, the seep near the east ridge running thinner than memory allowed. Haska spoke then, voice rough as gravel. Like the ravine, he said. The ghost of the ravine came back then too. Land remembered the blood. Land kept the score. The word hung. Ghost. Ravine. No one moved. No one corrected him. To speak of the dead so plainly, even in shadow, was to brush too close to the edge. The fire popped once, sending a small shower of sparks upward. They died before they reached the dark. Lila felt the words settle in her chest like cold lead. She knew the ravine. She knew the blood. She had stitched the wound herself. 3 winters passed, hands shaking in the dry heat while the man before her burned with fever. She had not known his name then. She still did not speak it now. Kaya stood at the outer edge of the circle, arms folded, face shadowed. Her eyes found Lila's for a long moment. No anger, no pity, only warning. Plain, wordless. You are here. You are seen. The balance trembles because of it. Lila wanted to step back, to fade into the night where she had learned to belong. But the Ola was still half full. The elders still waited. To leave now would break the order Kaya had set. To stay was to listen longer, to let the words of the dead brush against her skin like smoke she could not escape. She poured for the last elder. Her hands did not shake. Not yet. Goyathle rose without warning. The movement was fluid, quiet. He stepped past her, close enough that she felt the warmth of his body, the faint smell of leather and smoke on his shirt, without touching. He paused at her shoulder, just long enough for the words to reach her alone. The land doesn't forget. His voice was low, almost lost in the fire's murmur. No threat, no promise, only fact. He walked on, toward the dark beyond the circle. Lila remained kneeling, Ola braced against her hip, water still inside. The coals hissed softly. Kaya's gaze lingered another heartbeat, then turned away. The elders resumed their talk, quieter now, voices threading through the smoke like thin roots seeking water. But the silence around Lila had grown teeth. It pressed against her ribs, heavier than the Ola, sharper than the night air. She stayed there, unmoving, until the fire burned lower and the stars sharpened overhead. Somewhere in the dark, the land listened, and it had begun to answer. The dawn broke pale and merciless over the open desert beyond the ridges, the kind of light that showed every crack in the earth without offering warmth. Lila walked alone, the empty Ola slung across her back on a frayed strap that bit into her shoulder with each step. The path to the farther spring was longer than any she had taken before. 2 miles of dry wash and scattered mesquite. The ground cracked like old leather under her worn soles. No one had come with her. Kaya's order had been curt at first light. The near seep is thin. Go to the one beyond the bend. Bring what you can carry. Lila had not argued. The quiet of the morning felt like a gift at first, the camp fading behind her, the voices of waking children swallowed by distance. She walked with her head down, boots kicking small puffs of dust that hung in the still air before settling again. The wind had not yet risen. The silence was complete, except for her own breathing and the faint creak of the Ola against her spine. For the first time since the wagon, she felt the possibility of vanishing. If she walked far enough, kept her steps small enough, perhaps the eyes of the camp would forget her shape. The spring appeared at last, a shallow basin cupped between 2 low boulders, fed by a thin trickle that seeped from the rock face. The water was clear but meager, barely enough to fill half the Ola. She knelt, set the vessel down, and cupped her hands to drink first. The cold shocked her teeth. She drank slowly, letting it settle the dust in her throat. That was when she saw it. Half buried in the gravel at the water's edge lay a strip of cloth. Once white, now sun-bleached to gray, stiff with old blood and time. The edges were frayed where hasty stitches had once held it together. She knew it at once. Her own hands had torn it from her petticoat 3 winters ago in that dry ravine, pressing it against the ragged hole in a stranger's shoulder while fever raged through him. The cloth had stayed with him when she left before sunrise. Now it lay here, carried by rain or wind or something less explainable, waiting. Lila's breath stopped. She stared at the rag as though it might speak. To touch it again was to handle something that had touched death and returned, something the old ones would call marked by ghosts. To leave it was to let the land keep its secret. But she knew the camp would notice if she came back empty-handed or late. A low sound came from the brush to her right, a soft chuff, then stillness. She turned her head slowly. A coyote stood 30 paces off, thin flanks heaving, yellow eyes fixed on her. It did not move closer. It did not flee. It simply watched, ears pricked, as though the desert itself had sent it to observe. Lila felt the skin along her arms draw tight. The animal's presence was no coincidence. The signs had been building. Birds silent, wind dead, water failing. The land was answering in its own way. She looked back at the cloth. Her fingers trembled once, then steadied. She reached down. The fabric was rough under her touch, crusted where blood had dried years ago. She lifted it carefully, shook off the gravel, and for a long moment held it in both hands. The coyote did not blink. She felt the weight of eyes, not just the animals, but something larger, older, patient. She folded the strip once, twice, and slipped it into the deep pocket of her skirt. The cloth settled against her thigh, like a secret she could no longer deny. She filled the olla as best she could. Water splashing cold against her wrists, then rose. The coyote melted back into the scrub without a sound. The walk back was heavier. The olla pulled at her shoulders. The rag pulled at something deeper. She kept her pace even, eyes on the horizon where the camp would soon appear. When the first wiki-ups came into view, she saw Kaya waiting at the narrow path that led into the clearing. The older woman stood motionless, arms folded, face half-shadowed by the rising sun. Lila approached without slowing. Kaya's gaze went first to the olla, half full, less than expected, then to Lila's face. No words passed, but the way Kaya's eyes narrowed, the way her mouth tightened just enough to show the line of old scars along her jaw, said everything. She had seen the delay. She had felt the imbalance grow. Lila stopped a respectful distance away. She lowered the olla to the ground between them. Water sloshed once inside, settling. Kaya looked down at it, then back up. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, almost lost in the morning air. The spring was far. Lila nodded once. Kaya studied her another long moment. Then she turned away without another word, walking back toward the center of camp. But the space she left behind felt wider, colder. The elders would hear of the thin yield. The talk of failing water would spread, and with it, the quiet suspicion that the stranger in their midst carried something the land could not abide. Lila stood there, olla at her feet, the folded cloth heavy in her pocket. From the ridge above, a single raven called once, harsh, sudden, then fell silent again. The sound lingered in the air like a warning no one had yet spoken aloud. The sun hung low, bleeding red across the western ridges, turning the camp into a place of long shadows and dying light. In the central clearing, the fire had been built high for once, dry juniper stacked tight, flames leaping hungry and bright. The elders sat in their accustomed arc, blankets drawn close against the evening chill. Smoke rose straight, thick with the scent of resin and hot stone, curling upward until it thinned against the darkening sky. Lila was brought forward just as the last light left the high rocks. 2 young warriors walked her in from the edge of camp, not touching her, only guiding with their presence. She felt the packed earth under her bare feet, cool now, gritty. Her skirt was still damp from the spring, the folded cloth in her pocket heavier than it had been at dawn. She kept her eyes on the ground until they stopped her at the outer rim of the firelight. Kaya stood to one side, arms folded, face half in shadow. She did not speak. She did not move closer. She simply watched. Steady, silent, the way a stone watches water wear it down over seasons. Goyathlai sat among the elders, knees drawn up, hands resting loose on them. His gaze lifted when Lila entered the circle. It did not waver. The fire carved sharp lines along his jaw, caught the faint scar at his collarbone. The same pale line she had once closed with needle and thread. Haska spoke first. His voice carried the rasp of old smoke. The land is angry. Water runs thin. Birds do not call at dawn. The seep beyond the bend gives less each day. He paused, letting the words settle like dust after a wind. Something foreign walks among us, something that does not belong. The other elders nodded once, slow. No one looked at Lila directly, but she felt their attention like heat from the coals. One of them, older, thinner, eyes sunk deep, leaned forward. He pointed a single finger toward her throat. "That mark," he said. "The same shape, the same place, like the ghost that walked the ravine and left blood on the stones." The fire popped. A spark rose, died before it cleared the smoke. Lila's hand rose instinctively to her collar, covering the jagged scar from childhood iron. She felt the raised line under her fingertips, old, familiar, now exposed like an accusation. The elders murmured low, words in the old tongue she caught only in pieces. Imbalance, dia disturbed. Ghosts stirred. The land remembered blood. The land kept accounts. Her presence, white, outsider, marked by the same wound, had tipped the balance. The signs were plain. Kaya shifted her weight once. Her eyes met Lila's for the barest instant. Warning, not pity. Witness only. She would remember every word, every silence. Goyathle remained still. His hands did not tighten. His face gave nothing away. But the firelight showed the faint pulse at his throat, steady, controlled. Haska spoke again. "The stranger must answer. Speak, or be sent beyond the ridges. The land will decide the rest." Lila felt the circle close tighter. No escape to the shadows now. No work to hide behind. The choice lay bare. Speak the truth and break the unspoken law against naming what had died and lived again, or stay silent and let them cast her out into the desert with nothing but the clothes on her back and the coyote that had watched her at the spring. Silence stretched. The fire crackled. Smoke stung her eyes. She tasted dust on her tongue. She lifted her head. Her gaze found Goyathle's across the flames. He did not blink. She felt the weight of 3 winters in that look. The ravine, the fever, the quiet stitching in the dark. Her voice came small, but clear, cutting through the murmur like a knife through hide. "I am the one from the ravine." The words hung. No one moved. The fire seemed to draw back for a heartbeat, flames flattening as though the air itself had thickened. Kea lowered her head a fraction. Slow, deliberate. Witness to the breaking. The elders stilled completely. Goyathle's hands remained open on his knees, but something shifted behind his eyes. A door long closed now forced ajar. The camp held its breath. No wind stirred. No bird called. The silence was complete, dangerous, final. Lila stood there, scar exposed, words spoken and cannot be unsaid. The land had heard, and now it would answer in its own time. The moon had cleared the ridges by midnight, cold and thin, spilling silver light through the gaps in the Wikiup's brush walls. Inside Goyathle's lodge, the fire was small. One handful of dry twigs burning low in a shallow pit, flames barely higher than a man's palm. Smoke drifted upward in lazy coils, carrying the faint bite of cedar and the heavier scent of earth packed tight. The air inside was warm from the coals, but still carried the night's chill at the edges. Lila was brought in without ceremony. The same 2 warriors who had escorted her to the fire circle earlier now stopped at the low doorway, letting her duck inside alone. They did not follow. The leather flap fell closed behind her with a soft slap, sealing the space. Goyathle sat cross-legged on a folded blanket opposite the fire pit. His back was to the wall, shoulders square, hands resting open on his knees. The small flames lit half his face, left the other in shadow. He did not rise. He did not speak. He only watched her cross the short distance and lower herself to sit facing him, knees drawn up, hands clasped loose in her lap. Outside, just beyond the doorway, Kaya stood. She did not enter. She did not need to. Her silhouette was visible through the gaps in the brush. Still, arms folded, head slightly bowed. Witness. Nothing more. The wind had begun to rise, sudden and fitful, rattling the branches overhead, carrying the low moan of dust across open ground. Lila kept her eyes on the fire at first. The coals glowed dull red, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. She felt the weight of her own words still hanging in the air from the circle earlier. Spoken. Heard. Impossible to take back. Fear had not left her. It had simply changed shape. No longer the sharp edge of panic, but a deep, steady pressure. Like the earth itself pressing down. Goyathle remained silent longer than she expected. Minutes passed. The fire snapped once, sending a small spark spiraling upward. He did not flinch. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost lost under the wind outside. "You spoke of the ravine." Not a question. A statement. The words carried no anger, no demand, only the plain fact of what had been broken. Lila lifted her head. Their eyes met across the small flames. She did not look away this time. The scar at her throat felt exposed, raw under the firelight, though no one had touched it. She nodded once, slow, deliberate. "I stitched the wound," she said, held cloth to it until the fever broke. Left before light. The admission hung between them. Outside, the wind strengthened, whipping against the wickiup walls, making the brush rattle like dry bones. The fire flickered hard, flames bending sideways as though pulled by an unseen hand. Goyathle's gaze did not waver, but something shifted behind it. A crack in the stone mask he had worn since she first saw him. To name the thing aloud was to call it back. The old ones taught that a man who had bled near to death carried the shadow of that death with him always. To speak of it, to give it shape again in words, was to invite the ghost nearer. The land felt it. The wind carried the proof. Kaya shifted her weight once outside. A small sound, moccasin against dirt, but enough to remind them she heard every word. Goyathle's hands remained open on his knees. His fingers did not tighten, but after another long silence, he lifted his right hand, slow, careful, and touched the scar at his own collarbone. The same place, the same jagged line, faded now but still visible in the firelight. His fingertips rested there a moment, light as breath. The gesture was small, private. But Kaya saw it. Lila saw it. The acknowledgement passed between them without words, not affection, not possession, only the plain truth that the past had not stayed buried. He lowered his hand. His voice came quieter still. "You." One word. Soft. Final. The fire guttered. A sudden gust drove down through the smoke hole, snuffing the flames in a single breath. Darkness rushed in, complete, heavy, broken only by the faint silver leaking through the walls. No one moved to rebuild the fire. No one spoke. Outside, the wind howled once, low, mournful, then fell quiet again. Kaya turned her face away from the doorway, shoulders set. She had witnessed, The balance had tilted further. Ghosts stirred because the dead and living had been named. Lila sat in the dark, breath shallow, the folded cloth still in her pocket like a stone against her thigh. Goyathle remained opposite her, unseen now, but present, the space between them narrower than it had ever been. No path back, no way to unsay what had been said. The night listened, and it waited. The sun rose slow and unforgiving over the camp, a thin blade of light that cut through the lingering night mist without warming anything. By the time it cleared the eastern ridge, the entire band had gathered in the central clearing. No one had called them. The word had spread in the dark hours after the fire died. Quiet footsteps, low murmurs, the soft scrape of moccasins on stone. They formed a loose circle now, men and women standing shoulder to shoulder, children held close at the edges. The fire pit from the night before was cold ash, raked smooth, as though the ground itself had tried to erase what had been said. Slade Crow was dragged into the center. His wrists were bound behind him with rawhide, ankles hobbled just enough to keep him from running. He stumbled once on the packed earth, knees buckling under the weight of fear and the night's rough handling. His shirt was torn, face streaked with dirt and dried blood from a split lip. The scouts had taken him at the border wash before first light, trying to slip through with a mule and a half-empty canteen. He did not speak now. His eyes darted from face to face, wide and wet, landing nowhere long. Lila stood near the inner rim of the circle, close enough to Goyathle that she could smell the faint cedar smoke still clinging to his shirt. She did not touch him. She did not look at him. But she stood straight, back unbent, shoulders square, for the first time since the wagon. The folded cloth from the spring was still in her pocket, a small hard weight against her thigh. Kaya remained a few paces back, arms folded, face shadowed by the rising sun. Witness again. Silent. Remembering. The elders formed the forward line. Haska stepped out first, voice rough as dry gravel. This man carries death on his hands. He sells flesh. He crosses our land without leave. The law is clear. Blood for blood on sacred ground. And a low murmur ran through the circle. Agreement, not anger. Several men shifted their weight, hands resting near knife hilts. The ground beneath Slade's knees was already stained dark from where he had knelt too long. The seep nearby, the one that had fed the camp for generations, had shrunk to a muddy trickle overnight. The land's anger showed in small ways, cracked earth widening, birds absent, the wind carrying dust that stung the eyes. Lila felt the circle tighten. The elder's gaze moved to her, then away. They waited. Goyathle stood motionless beside her, hands loose at his sides, face unreadable. He did not speak for her. He did not step forward. He simply waited, letting the moment belong to her. She drew a slow breath, tasting smoke and dust on her tongue. Then she stepped one pace into the open space. "Let me speak to him first." The words fell quiet, but clear. No plea, no demand, just fact. Haska's eyes narrowed. The circle stirred. Small shifts, breaths held. To prolong the presence of such a man in the center, where ceremonies were held, where pollen was scattered at dawn, was to invite more imbalance. The Daaye had already been disturbed. To let the filth linger was to risk worse. But no one contradicted her. Not yet. Slade lifted his head. Recognition hit him like a blow, eyes widening, mouth opening soundless. "You," he rasped, "should be dead." Lila did not flinch. She looked down at him, voice steady, low enough that only the nearest could hear every word. "Who paid you to take me?" He laughed once, short, broken, then coughed dust. "Does it matter now?" "It matters." She waited. The sun climbed higher. Heat began to rise from the ground in thin waves. Slade's shoulders slumped. The fight had gone out of him hours ago. "Nora Kane," he muttered at last. "Your stepmother. Said you were trouble. Said no one would miss you. Paid good silver to make sure you disappeared." The name hung in the air. Lila felt it settle in her chest. Not surprise, only confirmation of what she had carried since the wagon. She looked toward the elders. "He speaks truth. Let the words carry back east. Let them poison the one who sent him." Haska's jaw tightened. "Blood cleans easier than words." Lila met his gaze. "Blood on this ground calls worse than words. Let him live. Let him carry the shame. Let others hear what he is." Silence followed. Thick. Dangerous. The wind rose again, sudden, whipping dust across the circle. The seep nearby gave a faint gurgle, then nothing. Goyathle moved then. Not far, just enough to stand a half-step closer to her side. He did not speak. He only inclined his head once. Small, deliberate. Agreement without possession. The elders exchanged looks. Haska exhaled through his nose, long and slow. Then he nodded to the scouts. "Untie his legs. Put him on a mule. Point him east. Let him go." Slade was hauled up, stumbling. He looked back once, at Lila, at Goyathle, eyes full of something between terror and disbelief. Then he was led away, limping toward the edge of camp. The circle began to break. People drifted back to their wiki-ups, voices low. Lila remained where she stood. The sun beat down now, hot on her neck. She felt the shift in the air around her. Not acceptance, not forgiveness, only the plain fact that she had stepped forward, claimed the moment, and tied herself openly to the man beside her. Kaya approached last. She stopped a respectful distance away. Her eyes met Lila's, sad, deep, without anger. She said nothing. She only looked. Then she turned and walked away, shoulders set against the rising heat. The camp emptied slowly. The fire pit remained cold ash. The seep stayed silent. Lila felt Goyathle's presence beside her. Steady. Quiet. Victory had come, but it carried its own weight. The land had heard every word, and the land did not forgive easily. The twilight came slow and gray along the narrow bend of the river, the water running thin and clear over rounded stones, carrying the faint smell of wet willow and distant rain that had not yet fallen. The camp lay behind them now, hidden by a low rise of rock and scrub, its fires small pinpoints of orange against the deepening dusk. No one had followed. For the first time since the wagon, Lila felt the absence of eyes. Not complete, never complete, but enough that the air between her and Goyathle carried only the sound of water and their own breathing. They sat on a flat shelf of sandstone above the bank, knees drawn up, a respectful distance apart. The stone still held the day's heat, warm against her palms where she braced herself. Goyathle sat beside her, elbows on knees, hands clasped loose, staring at the slow current without seeing it. His shirt was open at the throat, The scar there caught the last gray light, pale against darker skin. He looked older tonight, not in years, but in the way exhaustion settles into bone. Lila felt it too. The weight of the morning's circle pressed against her ribs. Slade's face as he was led away, the elder's silence, the slow drift of people back to their wiki-ups. Word had already begun to travel. Riders would carry it east along the old trails, through traders and outposts, back to the towns where Nora Kane still held a name. The silver she had paid for a girl's disappearance would buy her nothing now. Faye would flee in disgrace. The house, the store, the false widow's veil, all gone. Lila had won that much, but victory tasted like dust in her mouth. She drew her knees tighter to her chest. The folded cloth from the spring was still in her pocket, untouched since dawn. She had not looked at it again. To do so would be to invite the ghost closer. Goyathle shifted once. The movement was small, almost reluctant. When he spoke, his voice was low, rough from the day's smoke and silence. You could go. The words hung between them. Not an order, not a plea, only the plain offering of a path. Lila looked at the water. It moved steady, indifferent. She thought of the desert beyond the ridges, endless, open, empty. She thought of the coyote that had watched her at the spring, yellow eyes patient. She thought of the wagon, the ropes, the cold certainty that no one would come for her. If I go, she said quietly, I die out there. He did not answer at once. The river kept its rhythm, soft against stone. A single bat flickered low over the water, wings silent. If you stay, he said after a long pause, the land will not forget what was spoken. The elders whisper already. They say I have softened. They say the balance bends because of you. His fingers flexed once on his knees, small, controlled. He did not look at her. The admission cost him something visible, the faint tightening at the corners of his eyes, the way his shoulders settled heavier. Leadership here was not a crown to wear. It was a burden carried in silence, day after day, because the people needed it carried. To be seen as weakened, even for a moment, was to risk the band's edge against the world. Lila felt the truth of it settle in her own chest. She had stepped forward this morning. She had claimed the moment. Now the camp saw her not as captive, not as servant, but as the woman who stood beside their chief and spoke truths that should have stayed buried. The whispers would grow. Trust would thin. The land itself, already angry, would not forgive the disturbance easily. She turned her head. Their eyes met in the fading light. No tenderness showed there, only recognition. Deep, weary, shared. I choose to stay, she said. The words came steady, though her hands tightened on her knees. Goyathle exhaled once, slow, through his nose. He did not smile. He did not reach for her. He only nodded. Once. Small and final. From the shadow of a lone cottonwood farther up the bank, Kaya stepped forward. She had been there all along. Still, half hidden by the trunk, arms folded. She approached without haste, moccasins soft on the dry grass. When she reached them, she stopped a respectful distance away. She looked at Lila, then at Goyathle. No words passed. She lifted her right hand, slow, deliberate, and placed it on Lila's shoulder. The touch was light, almost weightless, but it carried the full measure of what she had witnessed. The breaking of taboo, the cost of truth spoken aloud, the slow unraveling of balance that might never be mended. The hand lingered a heartbeat longer than necessary. Then Kaya withdrew it. She turned without a word and walked back toward the trees, disappearing into the gathering dark. The river kept moving. A faint breeze stirred the willows, carrying the scent of distant sage and cooling stone. Lila felt the touch linger on her shoulder like a mark. Goyathle remained beside her, silent, staring at the water. The night deepened. Somewhere in the camp, a dog barked once, sharp, uneasy, then fell quiet. The land listened, and it had not yet finished speaking. The sun bled out slow across the western ridges, turning the sky a bruised purple that bled into black. From the high point, a flat ledge of sandstone jutting like a broken tooth over the valley, the camp below looked small, fragile, thin columns of smoke rising from wickiups, the faint shapes of people moving like shadows in the failing light. The air up here was thin, carrying the dry bite of sage and cooling rock. No wind stirred. No birds called. The silence was complete, heavy as a blanket laid over the land. Lila stood at the edge, arms loose at her sides, skirt hemmed with dust from the climb. Goyathle was beside her, close enough that she could hear his steady breath, but not touching. They faced east, the direction of Usen, where the first light would come if morning chose to break. The river snaked below, a dark ribbon reflecting the last gray streaks of day. She felt the ache in her legs from the walk, the faint pressure of Kaya's hand still on her shoulder from the riverbank earlier, like a mark that had not yet faded. Goyathle shifted once. The movement was small, deliberate. He reached into the small pouch at his belt, fingers closing around a pinch of fine yellow pollen. Hoddentin, sacred, ground from corn and cattail. He did not speak. He did not look at her. He lifted his hand to his throat, where the scar lay pale against his skin, and scattered the pollen there. Light, almost invisible in the dim. The grains clung for a moment, then drifted down, lost to the stone. Lila watched without turning her head. The gesture was private, not meant for show. No chants, no circle, no elders to witness. Just the quiet acknowledgement of a wound that had never fully healed. She felt the pull in her own chest. Her hand moved to her pocket, then to her belt, where she kept a small twist of cloth holding her own pinch, gathered from Kaya's silent offering days ago. She drew it out, fingers steady now, and mirrored him. Pollen dusted over the jagged line at her collarbone, where iron had once bitten deep as a child. The act carried no joy, no release. Only the plain fact of acceptance. The ghosts stirred by words spoken could not be laid to rest easily. The land felt it. The seep had run drier still today. The elders whispered of moving the camp soon, before the imbalance deepened. Lila's old life, the house, the store, the names Cain and Boone, lay ruined east of here, poisoned by the words Slade carried back. She had no path to return. Goyathle's people saw him differently now. The iron restraint that had held the band together softened in their eyes, whispers of weakness threading through the talk around evening fires. Leadership bent, even slightly, left cracks that the world could widen. They stood there a long time, pollen settling on skin and stone alike. The choice lay between them, unspoken but felt, to walk down together and face the slow unraveling of trust in the camp, or to part here, the river below, the desert beyond, and know that neither could survive it alone. Goyathle exhaled once, slow, controlled. He did not reach for her. He only turned his head slightly, gaze meeting hers in the half-light. "Stay if you choose," he said. The words were plain, heavy with the knowledge that staying meant scars shared, balance forever tilted. She nodded once. "I do." No more passed between them. The sun slipped fully below the ridge. Darkness crept up from the valley, swallowing the river first. Kaya was there, a shadow among the scrub a few paces back. She had followed without sound, arms still folded, face unreadable. She watched the pollen scatter, the quiet exchange. Witness to the end. She did not approach. She did not speak, only stood, eyes on them as they turned at last from the edge. Lila and Goyathlai started down the path together, steps measured, side by side, but not touching. The stone cooled underfoot. The campfires below flickered like distant stars. Kaya remained where she was, watching their descent. She did not follow. Not yet. The first faint wind rose then, from the east, hesitant, carrying the chill of night and the faint rustle of leaves. It stirred the dust at her feet, lifted a few grains of pollen from the ledge. The breeze gained strength, moaning low through the rocks, but it brought no peace. The land had not forgotten. The ghosts lingered. And in the dark, the scars remained. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Your presence means more than you know. If today's story awakened something inside you, don't let the trail end here. There are many more tales of courage, devotion, and faith waiting to be discovered. Subscribe, comment, share, and come back as we continue this unforgettable journey. Thank you, truly. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. All stories are intended solely for entertainment and may include fictionalized scenarios or dramatization derived from historical contexts. While AI assists in production, human creators supervise and adjust every piece to maintain sincerity, credibility, and emotional quality. We adhere entirely to platform regulations regarding AI content, ensuring no deepfakes or misleading portrayals. Licensed materials are used responsibly. Republishing, modifying, or extracting content without authorization is not allowed. We appreciate every viewer who respects originality and creative effort.